Hi, I'm Greg Corombos. My guest at this time is Brian Wesbury, Chief Economist at First Trust Advisors in Wheaton, Illinois. He's a former Chief Economist for the Joint Economic Committee of Congress. He's already joined us in the past few weeks to talk about the expected economic impact of coronavirus, but now we're getting more and more numbers, and the outlook, at least for the near term, is looking more bleak than we probably figured a couple of weeks ago. And so it's good to recalibrate those expectations and see what steps might be able to be taken in order to alleviate the pain that appears to be in the forecast now. And Brian, thanks very much for being with us.
Greg, it's always great to be with you.
Well, last week we got easily a record of nearly 3.3 million people filing jobless claims for just 1 week. This week, it's double that. It's more than 6.6 million. So you put the 2 weeks together, it's about 10 million. I just saw online that the Congressional Budget Office is projecting a 7% drop in GDP for the second quarter and a 28% annualized drop. And they're saying that even that could be worse than expected here. So What's the toll going to be here by April 30th? I mean, that's the best case scenario at this point. So even if we do start to ease up less than a month from now, what's the economic damage going to be by then?
Yeah, it's Greg. It is. There's no other word for it than ugly. So we had a 3.5% unemployment rate coming in to the coronavirus shutdowns, and that means we had about 5.7 million people unemployed. So in the last 2 weeks, we've seen another 10 million at least, because what we know is that the unemployment offices can't even handle the influx, but at least another 10 million, which means we are already at a 10% unemployment rate in the United States. My belief is that we have to remember there's 12 million people that work for restaurants. Open Table, by the way, is reporting a 100% decline in bookings from a year ago. And so we know some restaurants are doing takeout and finding some unique ways to serve their customers, but we're going to lose 10 million people just in restaurants. That doesn't count airplanes or airliners. That doesn't count hotels, barbers. We can't get our hair cut in a lot of states in this country. And so my belief is that we could, and I'm not trying to be an alarmist here, I'm just trying to be realistic, see an unemployment rate go up to as high as 20% in the short term. And GDP, I would not argue with a 28% drop. It could be bigger. It's unprecedented, the nature of the shutdown that we are living through. We've never seen anything like it. It's going to produce numbers on the economy that are worse than the Great Depression. Now, I want to caution, and I know I've gone on a little long, this is not the Great Depression. In no way do I see this lasting a decade. I think it's a relatively short-lived phenomenon, and we will, in late April, May, and no later than June, see businesses opening back up, and I think that's really important.
Well, I certainly would not call you an alarmist, Brian. There have been many times over the years where I've been pretty down, and you've been the one to say, you know what, this doesn't look that great right now, but I'm actually pretty bullish about where things are headed. So the fact that you see this dark of a forecast is certainly worth paying attention to here. What's the impact, at least short term, of the relief bill? That's been passed since we last chatted here. I know some folks are suggesting some of the personnel they'd love to keep long term. Hey, if you can take a break and file for unemployment claims, let's do that just to help us keep the business alive for a while. So do you think that's part of these huge numbers? And if it is it a significant part?
It is a significant part. There is no doubt that you are, in many, many cases, better off allowing your company to furlough you or being furloughed or just asking your company to let you go temporarily. You're better off because in many cases, there are jobs where tips are a major part of the income, and there's no way a restaurateur can pay tips. They might be able to pay the hourly wage, but under the unemployment benefit rules we have, you're actually going to get more than that regular wage. And so there's a real incentive for a lot of people to file unemployment claims because in this case, the government's payments are better. The second thing that's going to happen is we are going to give bridge loans to companies that keep people on to keep the payroll going, and that's going to help in the rebound. But, and this is where we just don't know, but the longer the shutdown lasts, the more small businesses will go under, if you will, and never be opened again. They will eventually find a new investor. I mean, if there's a great corner in New York City for a restaurant, you're going to put one there. But it takes time to reopen, reinvest, have all those small businesses come back. So I think the government's money that's going to help offset the government's shutdown of the economy is going to be beneficial in how quickly we open back up. But there's still going to be more of a U-shaped recovery, just because we are going to lose small businesses no matter what the government does. Small business has about 27 days of cash on hand on average. And a lot of this government relief is going to take longer than 27 days to get there. So we're going to lose some small business. They will eventually end up being reopened under new ownership, but that will take time.
So more of a U-shaped recession than the V-shaped recession that a lot of folks were initially hoping for.
Right.
Brian, this debate's been going on for a while now, and I think it's a false debate, and I'm sure you do too, that it's either between the economy and the stock market or saving lives. Obviously, both have to be huge priorities. You can't have a depression and hope to have the resources necessary to save lives. And you obviously need a healthy society to have a strong economy. So once we get to April 30th, where does that tension go from here, especially from an economist position like yours?
Yeah, I think that the tension to reopen grows, and obviously it all depends on. And Governor Cuomo has been clear; he loves the word apex, and that's the peak of the virus, the peak of the load on the hospitals. And once we reach that point, I think we're going to have a lot more flexibility in opening the economy. I mean, there's one thing to remember, and that is there's health issues on both sides. We know the virus is a killer, especially, we all know about it. It's a killer, but what we don't always know and understand is that recessions and deep declines in economic activity and big jumps in unemployment, that's a killer too. There are anxiety problems, depression problems, all suicides. During the Great Depression, we had one of the highest levels of suicide in American history. And so we do have to be, it's health issues on both sides. It's not just wealth in the stock market. It's also the well-being of people. It's one thing to protect your family from, or at least try to protect your family from catching a virus. It's another thing when you're unemployed and trying to do that same thing. And so it compounds problems. So the sooner we bend the curve, the sooner we can start allowing more economic activity, the fewer those problems will be in the long run.
We're talking with Brian Wesbury, chief economist at First Trust Advisors in Wheaton, Illinois. And Brian, what's your overall take on the relief package? Trump says he got 90% of what he wanted, and so he thought it was great. Obviously, there's what many people consider to be some frivolous spending here, but how well did it address what it needed to address?
Yeah, I would argue that I was worried at first. Whenever Congress is doing something like this on an emergency basis, everyone wants to scratch everyone's back and they want to throw all their pet projects in. And at first, it looked like it was going to be a lot of that. It turned out to not be, and so that's a relatively positive thing. However, at the same time, there are a lot of parts of this stimulus that, if made permanent, will grow the size of government massively. We will end up with a government the size of most European countries if we don't reverse course once this crisis passes. And when I look at Italy, when I look at Spain, and think about the national healthcare systems there, the lack of economic growth that they have experienced relative to the U.S. for decades now, they just don't have as many resources as we do to deal with this. What creates those resources is a vibrant private sector, and when you have a huge government, it's harder to have a vibrant private sector. And I guess that's one of the silver linings that I see in this, is that we realize is that when you shut down the private sector, even government can't offset it. We we're still going to have a massive drop in GDP. And at the same time, the real advances in antibody testing and vaccines and testing kits, they're coming from the private sector. And so I kind of hope that Americans, when they look at this, can see the power and that real wealth is driven by the private sector, and we need to use government only in these emergencies, and then we need to back it off when it's over so that we can create that wealth again.
Last question here, Brian. As you well know, there's already talk about another round. The next round, Nancy Pelosi is talking about easing the caps on state and local tax deductions, which was tightened in the 2017 bill. President Trump's talking about spending $2 trillion in infrastructure. If there is a next round, do you like those ideas? And if not, what should be in it?
Yeah, I don't like either one of those ideas. I mean, I'm not against infrastructure in the long run, but that is not a short-term stimulus. That does not help. It does not help us truly recover. As we've been through this, there are no shovel-ready projects. They take forever to get off the ground, and then when you look around the country, and I hate the blame game. I'm not trying to do that here, but we have all these people blaming everyone. And one of the things that has come under attack is companies that bought back their stock. And how were they supposed to know that there was a crisis coming? In fact, in this case, it's the government, and not only the feds, but the states and local governments that are supposed to be thinking about how to protect their citizens. And yet here we have states like Illinois and New York and Connecticut and Massachusetts who are basically running on fumes. Before this, they didn't have any extra money. They were actually not planning for the future because they couldn't afford to. And so should the federal government come in and help them now when they're going to see a big drop in tax receipts? Probably. But over the long run, we better learn that you need to save for a rainy day. And what our politicians have constantly done is they've spent every dime that comes into their coffers through taxes and more. And what that has done is it's put a lot of pressure on states and localities and cities right now, and they need the federal government to step in. And we need to get back to a place where everybody is managing their affairs in a much more stable manner, and not just start screaming about airlines who bought their stock back, because that's not their job to plan for a pandemic. It's the government's job. And so once we get done with this and we can have a sit down and look at all the mistakes that are made, I sure hope that we learn from it and plan better for the future.
Brian, we'll leave it there. I have a feeling we'll be talking again fairly soon, hopefully with a brighter horizon. Thanks very much for your time today.
Hey, thank you, Greg. Great to be with you.
As always, sir. Brian Wesbury, Chief Economist at First Trust Advisors in Wheaton, Illinois, also the former Chief Economist for the Joint Economic Committee of Congress. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.